Okay guys, still working on our disc brake conversion here. So the next part of this brake conversion, aside from getting the drums off and the disc assembly on the front, the next thing we got to do is move on to the master cylinder. Okay, because you can't just throw disc brakes on the front of your car and call it good. You need a different master cylinder. And not only another master cylinder, you need a proportioning valve, because you can't just have equal amount of pressures going to all four wheels. This is an extremely unsafe condition, like especially if you're in like slick roads. If you lock up your rears and your fronts, you're gonna send your car tail spinning and out of control. So we need a proportioning valve on the rear brake lines to limit the brake pressure going to the rear wheels. Factory Mustangs or Mustangs with factory disc brakes had a factory proportioning valve aside from the distribution block. So we have to do that if we're going to do this job properly. And so let's dive into removing the old master cylinder. We are going to install a booster on top of this, but we got to get the old stuff out of the way first and foremost. Here is our old master cylinder. We're going to start by breaking these lines free. And then we have two mounting bolts that go through the firewall. Those are also the bolts that go into your pedal support. I like to use these line wrenches. It just gets a much better grip on those lines. And then you won't be stripping that off or rounding off the nut as easily, especially with these old cars. You never know how long that's been on there for, and you never know how rusty it is. So, and I kind of use this for any kind of old brake line that I'm gonna break free. Once it's broke free, you can just kind of use your standard wrench. Okay, once you've threaded all your lines, or both of your lines all the way out, you can then remove your two mounting nuts that mount the master cylinder to the firewall. Now keep in mind that inside of the car, we've already disconnected the push rod assembly, and that's because on this car it's also getting a transmission conversion, and so we were already up inside the car. We already had the pedals out, swapping the pedals around, and so that stuff's already been removed. So keep in mind, if you're just doing this, without doing the trans like how I am, which is what most people are going to be doing, you need to go inside the car. There's a push rod inside of here that goes and connects to your brake pedal. So you need to disconnect that along with the brake light switch, and then you can pull your master cylinder out. Watch out for this brake fluid. Don't let this drip on anything, particularly paint. It will eat through your paint. It's nasty stuff. Okay, so now that our master cylinder is out of the way, here's our factory brake lines. This is for your front brakes, this is for your rear brakes, and we're going into your factory distribution block right here. So we gotta remove these two lines. And again, I'm using my line wrench to break these free. Okay, so what you want to avoid is putting so much torque on this thing that it just kind of rips the sheet metal out of the side here. So the trick that I do is I get a 9/16 and I get some torque on it to kind of pull against an imposing force, so you're not giving all that stress to this thin sheet metal on this car. And now that line is broken free. Same thing over here on the other side. Now that one's broken free. Okay, so now that we have these two lines out of the way, the next thing we need to do is disconnect the line going to the rear brakes, which is this line right here. So we're going to disconnect that, and that is going to go into our proportioning valve. Okay, so we have this line that goes to our rear brakes. We just kind of moved it up over here out of the way. And so here's the proportioning valve that we're using in our kit. It's clearly labeled with an in and out. And it also has the adjustable knob there on the top. So when putting this valve on, the out label on the valve is going to go to this rear brake line right here. So looks like these fittings do not match up, and so we're probably going to have to get an adapter fitting for that. Okay, we are back on the car. We just got finished bench bleeding our master cylinder. We also have our brake booster installed. So we have some lines that come in this kit, and again, just to reiterate, this is a Leeds brake kit. And so what I have already done was disconnect some lines. I'm going to remove these just to kind of give you a good visual, or at least remove that one. So you have a line right here. This is going to go to the front port of the master cylinder, which is for the rear brakes, and it connects to this port right here on the top of your factory distribution block. Okay, so we're going to install that but not tighten it. That way we have room to wiggle this around and get our threads started. Once all of our threads are started, then we can cinch everything down, and then you're going to have a little brake line that looks like this in the kit, and this will go to this front port of this distribution block. So again, we'll just get our threads started. That's going to go to the rear port of the master cylinder, which is for the front brakes. Okay, so front brake import on the factory distribution block goes to the port nearest to the firewall for your front brakes on your master cylinder. So underneath on your factory distribution block, the rear port that goes underneath this line right here, we already disconnected earlier in the video, and so we kind of just pivoted this aside over here. Now this is what's going to get our proportioning valve. So here's what a proportioning valve looks like. You're going to have an out port, an in port, and then we have a supplied straight brake line that we're going to have to bend to our liking to install this thing. Rear drum brakes and drum brakes in general are self-energizing. They tend to have a delayed response because the brake pressure has to overcome the return springs on the shoes, and then the drums are self-energizing. So the whole purpose of the proportioning valve is it's used to control the rear brake pressures. Okay, so mostly during like a hard stop or a panic stop, when the pressure to the rear brake reaches like a specific level, the proportioning valve then overcomes the force, stopping the fluid flow to the rear brakes. Okay, if that makes sense. So essentially, in a nutshell, this will regulate the pressure in the rear brakes. To further clarify, like your braking response in disc brakes is usually immediate. Drum brake response is delayed. And it's delayed because as the brake hydraulic pressure moves in the wheel cylinder, the pistons have to overcome the force of those return springs and force the brake shoes to contact the drum. You have to have a proportioning valve to keep the vehicle safe. So without this, the self-energizing action of that delayed response can cause the rear wheels to essentially lock up. And so we have to regulate that pressure, we have to limit it, and we have to have a majority of our braking force on the front, and the rears have to be reduced. Okay, so in your kit, you're going to get a brake fitting like this. It's an adapter. It's going to go on the rear brake line. It's the line going to the rear of the vehicle, and then that will split off at the rear axle, and one goes to the left and one goes to the right. I think it's probably important to note that this adapter is supplied in the kit probably only if you need it. So your proportioning valve, your out will go to here. So I think this will be nice to kind of mount this so that our adjuster knob is pointed out. That way we can kind of access that, and the valve will kind of just free float right here. Looks like this is going to be much easier to install our fitting on the valve first. Okay, so the last piece of this puzzle before we bring our master cylinder in and connect these lines is we have a straight line that is supplied, smaller fitting. It's going to go to the in part of the proportioning valve, right there. And then the other end of it is going to go to the bottom of the distribution block. So this is where we're going to custom bend this, but it might be wise to get the master cylinder in place first, so that way we're making our bends around the master cylinder. We can kind of, that's why they make it straight, because you can kind of move this around to where you want it. So let's bring in our master cylinder. Okay, so after a pretty good struggle, we got these lines all on there. So now keep in mind, when you're getting a kit like this that has pre-bent lines, like very rarely are those lines going to be like perfect fit. You are going to have to kind of stretch and bend a little bit of your lines to get them to fit, but it's just hard to get the threaded start because you don't want to like cross thread your your fittings on there. But anyways, so once everything is started, then you can kind of cinch up your lines, and then you should be good. So we have just the one last line there, and that's the line on the bottom of the distribution block that goes to the in port of the proportion valve, and that one we're gonna have to bend ourselves and just kind of figure it out and make it work. Okay, for our straight line, I just have this standard, tube bender. You can put it in here like this, and you can kind of make nice little easy bends. So in its position, it's really hard to kind of know exactly how to bend it, but we know that this port goes in the bottom of the factory distribution block, and then from there we know we have to kind of turn up and then down into the proportioning valve. So I think I'll kind of start with that and kind of see how that gets us in the ballpark. So we're gonna go from here, and we're gonna bend this thing kind of like that, I guess. So we're coming out and we're coming straight up, and then at some point in time we're going to turn back down. So that gives us a nice clean bend to start with. See if we can get this in there. Okay, so what I'm doing is I just kind of temporarily installed it down here in the bottom, and kind of give me a good visual as far as where to create my next bend. And the good thing is the proportioning valve is still pretty flexible as far as where it gets placed. So I have a pretty good margin of error here, and as far as if I get my bend not quite perfect, but. So yeah, I'm going to pull that back out and we'll make another bend. Okay, so we're in our distribution block, and we know we gotta come up, and we're gonna go somewhere around this area here, and we're just gonna turn it down like this. Okay, I'm hoping that gets us ballpark. Hopefully this is coming up on camera pretty good. This is like the hardest thing to film and try to do this and get a good view. But anyway, so on our master cylinder, this port right here is for your front brakes, and it twirls around and goes into your front brake port of your distribution block. Okay, now on the rear brakes, which is back here, that line comes over here to the top of the distribution block for the rear brakes, and then on the bottom of that same side comes out that straight line that we had to bend. It's going to come up and go right to our proportioning valve, which is right here. There's the adjuster knob. Underneath the knob, where you can't really see, ties into the factory rear brake line, and that's it. It is a little difficult trying to get your lines bent in there properly, but yeah, it does work. Obviously, this is a manual transmission car, so you want to really watch your equalizer bar here with your clutch rod and make sure that's not making contact to your proportioning valve. But we're gonna just kind of let that kind of suspend, so we're making sure there's nothing that's going to be rubbing or anything like that. Underneath, we'll probably tie that main line down a little better, so that way it stays, pretty secure. But anyways, yeah, that's it. So from here, we have to bleed the entire braking system. The entire brake system has to be bled, and so we will jump on that next.